I was cleaning Lila's room when I discovered a small black device hidden inside her favorite teddy bear, the one she called Mr. Snuggles. At first, I thought it was just some random trinket, a button that had come loose or a piece of stuffing that had accidentally worked its way out. However, when I tugged on the tiny black spot, I suddenly felt slight resistance. A moment later, a thin wire slipped out of the bear. My hands trembled as I realized what I was holding. It was a miniature microphone, crafted so professionally that it could have been mistaken for anything but a device deliberately placed inside a toy. The microphone was tiny, but its presence in my 9-year-old daughter's room felt like a blow to the heart. My name is Sandy, and up until this point, I thought I knew what betrayal was. I felt wrong, foolish, helpless. Who could have gone this far? My thoughts were racing when I heard a soft creak behind me. Lila was standing in the doorway. Her face, so innocent and pure, was twisted with concern. She had noticed I was doing something with her favorite toy. I quickly shoved the microphone into my pocket and forced a smile onto my face. "Just fixing a loose stitch, sweetie. It'll be good as new soon," I said. Lila nodded, and relief washed over her small face. "Can I take him to Grandma Martha's tomorrow?" she asked, breaking my thoughts. She said she would teach me how to bake chocolate cookies. My heart clenched. Of course, it could only be Martha. Who else could have done this? Who else could have crossed the boundaries of our home and interfered in my daughter's life? "Actually, sweetie, I think we'll have to postpone the visit. Mr. Snuggles needs a little operation," I lied. The lie burned me like bitter poison, but the truth could have been far worse. "But Grandma's waiting for me." Her bottom lip trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. "I'll call her myself," I reassured her, pulling Lila close. I breathed in the sweet scent of her strawberry-scented shampoo and felt my fears mix with anger. "Now go finish your homework. I'll bring Mr. Snuggles down as soon as he's ready." Once Lila had left, I began methodically disassembling the teddy bear, inspecting each part for any other devices. But nothing else was found. This discovery didn't bring relief. If Martha had planted one device, where else might she have left traces of her intrusion? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Nathan was home. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by his usual call, "Is anyone home?" "Upstairs," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside I was boiling. A minute later, he appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. His smile instantly disappeared when he saw the dismembered bear on the floor. "What happened here?" he asked, frowning. I picked up the microphone. "Your mother, that's what happened," I said evenly, though my voice quivered with rising anger. "What are you talking about?" he asked, stepping closer, confusion written on his face. "It was inside our daughter's teddy bear. The one your mother gave her for her birthday," I said, struggling not to shout. Nathan took the device and examined it closely. "You can't just assume it was her," he said cautiously. "Who else, Nathan? Who else has been trying to control us from the start? Who else is interfering with every step we take?" I stood up, my voice breaking through the suppressed shock. "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing toward the hallway as though fearing Lila might hear. "Lower my voice? You want me to lower my voice?" I almost shouted, feeling rage tear through me. As if someone doesn't already hear all of this. I grabbed the microphone back, feeling my fingers tighten around it harder than necessary. "Your mother crossed the line, Nathan. She's been crossing the line for years," I said, spitting out each word like venom. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that once seemed endearing but now only appeared as a sign of weakness. "But this is illegal," he muttered, not meeting my gaze. "Illegal?" I let out a short laugh, but there was no hint of joy in it. "You want to say this could be illegal, but she's been doing whatever she wants for years without facing any consequences? And that doesn't matter, right?" "You need to calm down," he said, his voice too even for a situation that was choking me. "There must be a reasonable explanation." "Reasonable?" My voice cracked into a whisper, thick with fury. Tell me, what could possibly be reasonable about a listening device found in our 9-year-old daughter's bedroom? This time, he fell silent. Of course, he had no answer. We both knew the truth, but only I was ready to face it. I bent down to gather the remains of Mr. Snuggles. My thoughts relentlessly surged ahead. If Martha could install one device, what else was she capable of? What other boundaries had she crossed? I'll call Dad, I said quietly, without even looking at him. Sandy, don't. He's a lawyer, Nathan. And right now, I need someone on my side. I pushed him away, still holding the mutilated bear in my hands as if it was the last trace of our former normal life. This is more than just a toy, and you know it. As I left, his voice caught up with me in the hallway. What are you going to do? I stopped but didn't turn around. I'm going to find all the bugs she's planted. Document everything. And then, Nathan, I'm going to make your mother regret starting this game. I spent the night searching. Room by room, corner by corner. The house, which was supposed to be our fortress, now felt like hostile territory. Nathan slept on the couch, avoiding confrontation with me. And I kept searching. By morning, I found 2 more devices. One was hidden behind the kitchen clock, the other under the dresser in our bedroom. Each new discovery felt like a slap to the face. My frustration and despair grew with every passing minute. With the first rays of sunlight, my phone buzzed. Martha's name lit up the screen. I let the call ring 4 times before answering. Sandy, dear, her voice was as sweet as if she'd just taken a pie out of the oven. I heard Lila won't be coming today. Is everything okay? I tightened my grip on the phone, imagining her sitting in her perfect living room, in one of her pastel cardigans, starched and impeccably pressed. Mr. Snuggles needs some repairs, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Repairs? Her pause was measured, like someone buying time to formulate an answer. I don't quite understand what you mean. Nothing strange, right? I paused again, longer than she did. Only yesterday, I found something interesting inside it. Something that shouldn't be in a children's toy. Silence settled on the line, stretching on for too long. Maybe we should discuss this over coffee, she finally said. I baked those buns you like. I gritted my teeth. I prefer to speak without an audience, Martha. Her voice softened, as if she were trying to calm me. I'm worried about you, dear. Nathan mentioned you've been looking tense lately. You're spending a lot of time on your phone, coming home late from work. Every word she spoke cut like a knife. Blood froze in my veins. There it was. Her game. Nathan had already told her what she could use against me. A mother notices these things, she continued, her tone gradually becoming more severe. We always want the best for our children. Our happiness is their happiness, isn't it? I could feel the tension building in my body with every word she spoke. She wasn't even trying to hide her manipulation. I watched as Lila got into Nathan's car to go to school. Her smile radiated the usual lightness, the innocence I now envied. My daughter lived in a world where Grandma was a cozy home with the smell of freshly baked cookies. For me, however, Martha's name had become synonymous with intrusion and control. I watched their car until it disappeared around the corner, then hung up before Martha could say another word. Nathan entered the kitchen, adjusting his tie. That was Mom calling, he started nonchalantly. She wanted to know why Lila won't be coming today. His voice sounded like it was just another routine conversation, nothing important. But I couldn't take his words as neutral anymore. I picked up the bug I had just taken out of the kitchen clock and squeezed it between my fingers. Do you want to explain why you're discussing our marriage with your mother? I asked, carefully choosing my words to keep my anger from overtaking the conversation. Nathan sighed and reached for the coffee pot as if my words were just another item on his list of morning tasks. She's concerned, Sandy. We're all concerned. You've been different lately. Different? I laughed, but there was no joy in it. You mean since I found out our house is being bugged? Since I realized my husband has been reporting on me to his mother? His face tensed. Don't twist the situation, he snapped, slamming his mug on the table with such force that coffee spilled over the edge. You're the one staying late at work, always on your phone, he continued, throwing me a look full of reproach. I'm working overtime because we're understaffed, and you know that. You know everything about my schedule because I tell you everything. My voice faltered, but I forced myself to continue. When did you stop trusting me, Nathan? When did you start seeing me as a threat? He grabbed his briefcase as if he was about to run. Maybe Mom's right, he said over his shoulder, avoiding my gaze. Maybe you need help. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my blood rush to my cheeks. Help? Your mother is spying on us, manipulating you, and I need help. Look at yourself, he pointed to the disassembled clock, to the drawers I had emptied in my search. You're tearing our house apart. Because it's already falling apart, I responded, my voice sharp as a knife. We're being watched, Nathan. Our daughter is living under surveillance. How can you not see that? He just shook his head and headed for the door. I'm late for work. We'll talk about this later. No, we won't, I stepped forward, blocking his way. Because later, you'll call your mother, and she'll tell you what to think. His eyes faltered for a moment, something flickered in them, perhaps doubt, or maybe guilt. But it lasted only a moment. Move, Sandy, he whispered, and I stepped aside, allowing him to leave. From the window, I saw him stop by the car, take out his phone, and bring it to his ear. I knew who he was calling. It was hardly anyone else. My phone rang. A message from my father appeared on the screen. I got your message. I looked at our house, which now felt foreign and desecrated. On the kitchen table were scattered the evidence of Martha's intrusion. Nathan thought I was paranoid, that I saw conspiracies where there were none. But he was wrong. When I found another device hidden under the cabinet in our living room, my resolve solidified. I had been blind to Martha's manipulations, to Nathan's weakness, to the destruction that was slowly eroding our marriage from within. But now, I had clarity. And Martha would learn that she wasn't the only one who could play the long game. I took out my phone and dialed the familiar number. Hi, a voice answered on the other end. Sarah, it's Sandy. Do you remember the favor you promised me? I spoke calmly, though inside, everything was burning. I need access to the client records from the security company. Specifically, anyone who bought surveillance equipment in the last 6 months. Sarah nodded, and a few hours later, I received information that turned out to be much more compromising than I had expected. Martha hadn't just bought surveillance equipment. She had hired a private detective. 3 months of surveillance were documented with such meticulous attention to detail that I felt nauseous just looking at the papers. I spread them out on my father's dining table, feeling how my fingers barely held onto the sheets. Every photograph, every note from the detective felt like a stamp on my life. She had been watching me. Not once, not twice, but methodically, every day. My hands trembled as I showed Henry the photos of me standing behind the counter at the grocery store, laughing with colleagues, having coffee on a short break. Look at the dates, Dad, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. It started right after I refused to let her remodel our house. Henry adjusted his reading glasses, his jaw tightening. This goes beyond harassment, Sandy, he said coldly. This is criminal behavior. Dad, that's not all, I replied, handing him my phone. On the screen was a message from our neighbor Carol. Martha says you're having an affair with your boss. She insists she hired a detective to prove it. I saw my father's face drain of color. She's turning Nathan against you, he said quietly, but his eyes burned with steel. The sudden sound of the doorbell made me jump. I walked to the window and saw Nathan's car in the driveway. My father squeezed my shoulder and, without a word, walked toward the door. Where is my wife? Nathan's voice rang out from the hallway. Her car's been here all day. Lower your voice, Henry warned. You're in my house, and I ask that you respect that. They entered the dining room, and Nathan stopped dead in his tracks when his eyes fell on the table, covered in photos and reports. What is this? He asked, his voice faltering. It's your mother's doing, I replied, picking up one of the photos. It showed me sitting in a cafe with my boss. Tell me, Nathan, when she showed you this, did she mention it was a work lunch, that there were 6 other people at the table? He stepped closer, picking up photo after photo. His face showed confusion mixed with something that looked like pain. These are photos from 3 months of surveillance, I said, not hiding my sarcasm. And all because I didn't let her remodel our house. I laughed, but the laugh was bitter. She spread rumors about me. Told everyone I was unfaithful. And you believed her. I didn't believe her, he replied, his voice quiet, but the words sounded uncertain. You didn't believe her? I stepped closer, snapping, but you did nothing, Nathan. You let her keep going. He ran a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away traces of embarrassment or guilt. His gaze fell on the papers. The detailed reports made by the detective lay before him like an accusation. She said she was worried about you, that you were acting suspiciously, and that justified her actions, he muttered. The front door opened again, and her voice sounded like a reproach. Nathan, are you here? Martha appeared in the doorway, perfectly groomed, wearing her light blue sweater. Her face tightened when she noticed the photographs on the table. What's all this about? Just don't, Nathan raised his hand, stopping her explanation. Darling, I can explain everything, she began, but I could no longer stay silent. Explain what? I blurted out, feeling how fury pushed out the last traces of fear. How you hired someone to spy on me. How you planted listening devices in my house. How you told everyone I was cheating on your son. Her face contorted. I was protecting my family, she screamed, and her mask of the perfect mother finally slipped, revealing the ugly side I had always suspected, but had never seen so clearly. My family? Nathan interrupted her, his voice sounding dull. You destroyed my marriage. You jeopardized my daughter's safety. Everything I did for you, she cried, stepping toward him. No, his voice was quiet, defeated. You did it for yourself. She reached out, but Henry stepped between them. Martha, I think it's time for you to leave. Unless you want to explain your actions to the police. She straightened up, smoothing her sweater. You're all overreacting, she said, her voice trembling, but no longer sounding so confident. Nathan, let's go home and talk about this. But Nathan didn't look at her. He was staring at one of the photos, where I was standing outside Layla's school, clearly taken through a telephoto lens. Martha's composure cracked, and her voice wavered. I needed to know, she threw out, trying to maintain control. Get out, Nathan's voice was low, almost threatening. His hands were shaking. Get out, before I forget you're my mother. Martha darted for the door, casting us one last cold look before disappearing. The silence that followed her departure felt even louder than all the words spoken before. Nathan gathered the photos into a neat stack, his movements mechanical, almost lifeless. I'll need copies of all this, he said, not once looking at me. For a restraining order. Nathan. I started, but he raised his hand, interrupting me. Please, don't, he said, his voice tired. When he finally looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that had long been absent from our marriage. I'm not asking you to forgive me. But I need to fix this. At least for Layla's sake. I watched him leave, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Henry approached me and touched my hand. What now? He asked. I watched as Nathan's car disappeared around the corner, thinking of all the nights I had cried into my pillow, doubting my sanity. Now that the truth was out in the open, my resolve had solidified. We wouldn't let Martha hurt any family again. Some betrayals cut too deep to forgive. Some wounds can only be healed by justice. 3 days after that encounter, I found Layla crying in her room. These weren't the usual childish tears from a fight with friends or scraped knees. These were quiet, heart-wrenching sobs that made her small shoulders tremble. "Sweetie, what happened?" I sat next to her, gently hugging her. She clung to me like when she was little, scared from bad dreams. "Jessica said." She hiccuped, trying to get her breathing under control. "She said you're going to leave us. Like her mom left them." Those words hit like a punch to the stomach. Jessica was Martha's neighbor's daughter, a frequent guest in her house. Who told Jessica such nonsense? I asked, already knowing the answer. Her mom heard it from Martha's mom, Layla whispered, wiping away her tears. "Is it true? Are you going to leave?" Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. A message from Carol. "Check your email. You need to see this." I held Layla tighter, kissing the top of her head. "No one's going anywhere, sweetie. Why don't you get your things ready for bed? I'll be right back." I stepped into the hallway and opened the email from Carol. The attached video was from her security camera. On the screen, I saw Martha standing at Carol's doorstep yesterday. The audio was clear, and her voice rang out sharply, like a bell. "I'm just so worried about Layla. The poor child needs stability. Nathan is considering custody." My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. This was no longer just spreading rumors. She was laying the groundwork for a case against me, aiming to take my daughter away. I felt panic rise like a wave, but it was interrupted by the doorbell. At the doorstep stood Paul, my father-in-law, nervously fiddling with an envelope made of thick manila paper. "I know it's late," he began, looking away awkwardly. "But we need to talk." He handed me the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. "Martha doesn't know," he said. "I found this. She's been planning all this for months." Inside were printed emails between Martha and a family court lawyer. They discussed grounds for custody, fabricated evidence of my instability, and gathered testimonies from her friends about my disturbing behavior. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice sounded foreign, even to myself. Paul's shoulders slumped. "Because I failed Nathan, letting her manipulate him all these years. But I won't let her hurt Layla." "Grandpa Paul?" Layla's voice came from the top of the stairs. She was holding Mr. Snuggles tightly to her chest. Paul's face twisted in pain as he looked at his granddaughter. "Hi, sweetie, is everything okay?" Layla's voice was a thin beam of light in this growing darkness. "Yes, everything's fine," I lied, forcing a smile. In reality, nothing was fine. My mother-in-law was plotting to take my daughter, my marriage was in ruins, and amidst all this chaos, it felt like I had lost sight of the most important thing, protecting Layla from all of it. "Grandpa Paul just wanted to drop something off," I added. "Go back to bed, darling." Layla nodded, her big eyes scanning her grandfather's face, before disappearing behind her bedroom door, still clutching Mr. Snuggles. Once she was gone, Paul turned to me, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Martha is having lunch with the lawyer tomorrow at noon, at Lupa Bistro." I realized he wasn't saying this casually. This was our chance to beat her to it. "Why now?" I blurted out, before I could hold myself back. Paul looked at a family photo on the wall, where we all smiled from last Christmas. "Because I've been turning a blind eye for too long," he replied. "She convinced herself she was protecting our family, but in reality, she's destroying it." He started toward the door but paused. "Whatever you decide to do, I'll testify if needed." After he left, I dialed my father's number. "Dad, remember you said this was becoming a legal issue? We need to act fast." "What happened?" Henry asked. I looked at the custody documents Paul had given me. It was a carefully woven web of lies, fabricated evidence of my instability, testimonies from her friends supposedly confirming my problems. "She won't stop," I said. "She's trying to silence Layla. We need to end this." "I'll make a few calls," he replied. But, Sandy, one way or another, this ends tomorrow. I hung up and went to check on Layla. She was already asleep, clutching Mr. Snuggles, the toy that had started it all. I touched the spot where I had found the first listening device. I remembered the rage I'd felt then. Now, that fury had given way to something colder, more calculated. Martha wanted a war, but she had forgotten one crucial thing: a mother protecting her child is the most dangerous adversary. Tomorrow, she would learn what I was capable of. The noise of lunch conversations filled Lupa Bistro, but I could barely hear it over the pounding of blood in my ears. I sat at a corner table, watching Martha and her lawyer through a lace partition. Their voices were loud enough to hear clearly. "The surveillance evidence is compelling," the lawyer said, flipping through papers. "Combined with neighbor testimonies and the psychological evaluation." Martha drummed her perfectly manicured nails on the table. "Judge Harrison owes me a favor," she said, with a thin smile. I pressed the recording button on my phone, hidden under a napkin. Henry sat next to me, his presence reassuring. "The restraining order complicates things," Martha continued, her voice a little quieter, but no less determined. "Nathan's weakness is a temporary setback," she added, as if speaking about her son like some pawn. The lawyer nodded. "Once we present the evidence of your daughter-in-law's instability, the situation will change." At that moment, my phone vibrated. "A message from Carol. Martha's friends are at your house. They say they're gathering evidence. Something about her plan." The room seemed to tilt before my eyes. I showed the message to Henry, trying to process what had just happened. "Go," he whispered. "I'll handle things here." I was halfway to my car when Nathan called. His voice was strained, almost shrill, filled with panic and confusion. "Why is my mom's bridge club sneaking around our house? You're telling me I started the car? Did you give them the keys? Didn't you make them shut up? And then they said they were leaving?" He didn't stop talking, his voice growing more frantic, as though trying to hold back some mad storm he'd set in motion. "From casseroles, because you fought. His words sliced through the air, and despite my worry and anger, I couldn't help but laugh. It was a harsh, dry laugh, born of exhaustion and disillusionment. I had broken him, broken my mother, broken this whole rotten system. He didn't even realize how deep we were already mired. At lunch with the lawyer right now, planning to take Layla from us, and you still believe her lies. What lawyer, Nathan? What are you asking your father?" My words were cold and detached, and despite everything, I realized this conversation was over. I hung up with a firm, resolute click as I turned onto our street. There were cars parked in front of the house, lined up along the curb. These loyal followers of Martha, as I now called them, were supposed to document every detail of my unstable family situation. Every step, every word, every movement. I had no doubt they were recording every reaction of mine, every moment of my anxiety, creating their version of events for both the court and anyone else who wanted to see my inability to be a mother. When I stormed through the door, they scattered like cockroaches, panicking, trying to hide, but it was already too late. Sandra, Martha's best friend, was clutching a notepad in her hands, probably using it as a weapon in this mission of hers. She had always been there, ready to serve Martha and her ideas, never once questioning what those ideals were. Patricia was standing by the window, her face showing neither surprise nor regret. It was the face of someone ready to support whoever could provide the right information. "What are you doing here?" My voice was hoarse with anger. I glared at each of them, not hiding my fury. My words left no room for doubt. These women, this whole thing, was planned, and I could only guess how many other people were involved in this vile game. Sandra took a step forward, her hands trembling, but she kept her composure. "Sandy, you know we care about Layla," she said, her voice soft, but there was an underlying threat in it. There was no sincerity in her words, only calculation. I could feel it, and it made me even more disgusted. "Care?" I sneered, but the sneer was bitter and sharp. You care about controlling my life, destroying it, and then building something of your own design on its ruins. You took my house, you took my husband, and now you want to take my daughter? Patricia seemed to be taken aback by how openly I spoke, and she took a small step back. But Sandra didn't flinch. You think you're the only one suffering here? Her voice was a hostile whisper. Martha just wants to make sure Layla has a better life. You can't give her what she needs. You're too unstable. I felt my heart tighten. With each word, they became more certain of their righteousness, and I began to lose control of the situation. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't let them take Layla. Not for anything. As I was trying to gather my thoughts to respond, the sound of the doorbell rang from outside. I froze. I can't testify against her. His words echoed in my mind like a stone thrown into an empty barrel. He had finally said it. He had said that she was my mother, and in those words, I heard the final blow, the last nail in the coffin. It was the last betrayal, the final thread that connected me to him, to this world I had lived in. The click echoed. The sound was sharp, like a shot in the dark. I realized I had to do this alone. There was no point in hoping for someone else, for their support, for their understanding. I turned away, my throat burning, but I whispered, almost inaudibly, "Understand one thing. After this, there's no turning back. You're choosing your mother over your daughter's safety. A marriage with weapons." My voice remained steady despite the internal storm. I wanted to scream, cry, break down, but I couldn't. Instead, I felt empty. "Sandy, get out." His words were cold, almost lifeless. I saw his face pale, but he didn't retreat. He turned and walked toward the door. "I'll have my lawyer contact you." His voice tightened, like a taut string. "You're talking about real custody agreements, not your mother's version." These words burst out like the final push toward the inevitable break. When he left, I walked over to the table and touched the photo he had dropped. It was our last photo together, taken last summer, when we were still pretending everything was perfect. We were all smiling, and perhaps we still believed in that lie. I stared at the image, and like a slap, the realization hit me: everything I knew was destroyed. Tomorrow, I would fight. I would fight for my daughter. I would use Martha's own tactics against her. But tonight, I would allow myself to mourn what was lost and prepare for war. I had closed my eyes for too long, hoped for too long that everything would work out. But now, standing at this precipice, I understood it had all been an illusion. The courthouse steps seemed endless as I approached its doors. Each step felt heavy, like a stone on my heart. The air was thick with uncertainty. Everything that had come before felt as if it had vanished, dissolved into emptiness. I knew there was only a fight ahead, and that I would never turn back. The evidence that was supposed to expose everything was gone. The file could not be found. I checked the records again and again: photographs, footage from the neighbors' surveillance cameras, pictures of the bugs that had started to malfunction at some point. Everything I had painstakingly gathered, like a box of secrets, was now empty. I felt like I couldn't breathe. All that was left was to fight this blank screen, which I kept reading desperately, hoping for a miracle. And then Martha appeared next to us. Her smile was sharp, like a razor blade. She knew. She always knew. And she was ready to destroy everything I had tried to build to protect my daughter. "Technology can be so unreliable," she said, her voice almost gentle, like that of a seasoned manipulator. "Phones get erased, cloud accounts get hacked. It's truly tragic." My heart was pounding in my chest. I realized this hadn't been an accident. Paul seemed to shrink into the corner, helplessly watching what was happening. Somehow, Martha had gotten to my phone. She had erased everything. Erased it as if it weren't my life, my attempts to protect Layla, as if she had the right to destroy it all. And here, in the court, when my whole world collapsed, all those efforts, all that evidence, unraveled into nothing. My statement sounded like nonsense, like the hysteria of a woman trying to justify her paranoia. Every witness, Martha's well-trained friends, portrayed me as a madwoman who couldn't maintain her sanity. They painted a picture of someone who, in the end, was too emotional, too weak to be a reliable parent. The presented evidence was deemed unreliable, and Judge Harrison, without looking at me or uttering a single word of sympathy, declared, "I grant temporary custody to the father with visitation rights supervised by Mrs. Wheeler until the psychiatric evaluation and treatment are completed." These words sounded like physical blows, like stones falling on my head. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. My entire life, my struggle, my hopes, had crumbled to dust. I tried to speak, but my words drowned in the noise of the courtroom, as if I had already become invisible, as if I no longer existed except as an object of their experiment. An experiment they were conducting with my life. Martha smiled, her gaze sharp, cold as steel. I knew she hadn't won yet. But in that moment, everything seemed as if she had stripped me of all weapons, all evidence, and all means to resist. I left the courtroom, feeling as if I had no legs beneath me, as if the ground was slipping away from under my feet. At 10 a.m., Carter Park was empty, as though the whole world had momentarily forgotten about its existence. Only one person sat on a bench, his figure familiar yet distant with time. It was Paul, my father-in-law, who seemed older than I had ever seen him. The wrinkles on his face had deepened with each passing year, but his eyes were still the same, clear and penetrating. I approached him, not knowing what to expect, and he, without a word, handed me a USB drive. I took it, my hands trembling slightly, and a sense of anxiety grew in my chest. He said nothing, but I felt his gaze pierce through me, as if he knew I was about to face the final choice in this game. "I made copies," he said briefly, as if there was no point in further explanation. The flash drive contained emails from Martha, bank statements, purchases of surveillance equipment, even payments made to the judge. Everything I had been searching for, everything that could prove her manipulations, everything that could give me back control over my daughter. But why now? Why now? I asked, still not believing what was happening. Paul looked at me, his face twisted with bitterness, but his voice was calm, almost quiet. "Because yesterday I was watching my wife," his words pierced the air like a knife's edge. "I watched her destroy an innocent woman to control our son. And I watched as our son allowed it to happen. I was blind, Sandy, and now it's too late." Before I could reply, the car door slammed shut nearby. Martha. She was walking through the park, her face twisted with rage. She approached with the expression of someone who felt the whole world owed her something, ready to take everything she believed was hers. Her eyes were burning. "Paul, what are you doing?" Her voice was strained, full of panic. Paul squared his shoulders and met her gaze. His words, though quiet, sounded like a verdict. What was I supposed to do? He shook his head, losing patience with each word. "Years ago, you betrayed your family. You destroyed us, you destroyed our son. You manipulated him, used him to achieve your own goals. You ruined our family, every time you drove Nathan's friends away, every time you manipulated the situation to make him do what you needed." Martha took a step forward, her hand reaching for the flash drive, but I stepped back, gripping it tightly. I knew this was going to be a war, and now I had no other choice. "You won't get this," I said quietly but firmly, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "You destroyed everything that was valuable to us. You destroyed my life and my daughter's life, and I won't let you do it again." Martha froze, her face paling for a moment. She realized she no longer controlled the situation. And in that moment, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a new life, without her, without the poison she had been pouring into our hearts all these years. Paul watched us both, his gaze tired but resolute. It was as if he had finally realized he could no longer stay silent. He stood between us, separating two wars that, it turned out, had not yet ended. But at that moment, I understood this was no longer just a battle for my daughter, it was a fight for my own freedom and for a future I could build without fear. Martha, as if sensing that her time had passed, took a step back, but her eyes still burned. She knew everything had changed. Paul stepped forward, his face heavy as though the weight of his entire life was pressing down on his shoulders. He didn't turn away, didn't try to hide his disappointment. He just stood there, looking at us, at the woman he had known his entire life and at the son who had to make this choice. "I can," he said, his voice even, but with an overwhelming weariness. "I've watched you destroy lives for 30 years. Martha." I was silent. No, I couldn't justify her. No words could undo what she had done, the family she had destroyed with her control, her obsession. I didn't care how she tried to justify herself, how she always knew how to manipulate things to go according to her script. It was pointless. Martha couldn't hide her fury. Her face twisted, and she turned to Nathan, reaching out for him as usual. But it no longer mattered. "For him, darling, please," her words were clenched, like an invisible fist with which she had always tried to keep everyone under her control. But Nathan stood silently, looking at the USB drive. His eyes flickered between the evidence of her manipulations and her attempts to overshadow everything around him. He glanced at the ruins of his marriage, his family, his trust, and finally, he said it. "I choose my daughter." His voice was quiet, but clear. It was like a revelation, like the realization that there was nothing more important to him. He had made his choice. "I choose my wife," he added. Martha shrank back, her body betraying the defeat that had finally come. Decades of control she had held in her hands slipped away like sand through her fingers. This was the end, not a victory, but a tragic finale to her reign. But I felt no satisfaction. There was no triumph, no joy in the fact that the moment had finally come when her manipulations no longer held power. All I felt was exhaustion, a weight that refused to lift, and a deep, aching sadness for the family she had destroyed. I walked over to Nathan, took his hand, and despite all the pain that lay between us, I knew he had truly chosen me now. We both understood that this wasn't a fight to win, it was a fight to reclaim what had been stolen. "The restraining order stays," I said, my voice almost a whisper, but the words were final. "But this time, it's real. Stay away from my daughter. Stay away from my family." As I spoke those words, I felt something begin to rebuild within my soul, as if the final stone was being placed on a foundation that had been destroyed by decades of lies and manipulation. It was real now. There was no going back. When we left the park, Paul headed to his car. His steps bore no sense of victory, only the heaviness of knowing that after all this, nothing would ever be the same. Nathan walked in the opposite direction toward his own car, and despite the silence between us, I could feel that he was truly present, that perhaps he had finally chosen us. From the direction we had come, I could still feel her presence, Martha, standing in the distance, her figure like a shadow fading on the horizon. The next morning, as the light of dawn streamed through the windows, I opened the custody paperwork. My fingers nervously skimmed the pages as I outlined the terms: joint custody with conditions. Nathan would attend therapy, Martha would uphold the restraining order, and our family counselor would oversee transitions. It all felt so rigid, so necessary to restore even a semblance of control to this appended life. I filled out the forms, signed the papers, and sent them to the court. My task was done, but inside, something still ached, like the sharp edge of a knife piercing every decision. I drove to my father's house to discuss what lay ahead. When I entered, Layla was clutching Mr. Snuggles, her favorite teddy bear, its eyes worn, its paws frayed from time. I could feel the tension in her small body, as though she was holding in all these adult emotions that should have been foreign to her. "Is Grandma sick?" Layla asked, not lifting her eyes. Martha, as always, stood nearby, putting on an air of concern. But her voice, so calculated, immediately betrayed her true intentions. She was manipulating Layla's emotions, trying to position herself as the one who could comfort her. But I knew better. "Sometimes people carry pain inside and hurt others because they're scared," she said, smoothly weaving her words. "Like when I pushed Jenny at school because I was afraid of losing my best friend." Her words were directed at Layla, but their meaning was aimed at me, at undermining my strength. It was the same as always: manipulation, control, fear cloaked in pitiable phrases meant to feign independence and love. But I could no longer believe her false justifications. I tried not to look at her, but my eyes met hers. She knew I'd heard, knew I understood her game. None of it could stop me now. I took Layla's hand and guided her toward the door. At the threshold, I turned back, and my eyes met Nathan's. He stood in the driveway. This wasn't our old house, not the one we had once shared. It was a small rented house on the other side of town, far from Martha's influence, her intrusions, her false accusations, and her manipulations. It was a modest refuge where, perhaps, we could find some semblance of peace. Layla ran to him, tucking Mr. Snuggles under her arm, and smiled. For her, this was a new door, a fresh start. "Did you find Martha's journal?" I asked quietly. Nathan, as if sensing the need for caution, looked at me with tension in his gaze. He sighed, and his eyes darkened. Yes, the journal was another piece of evidence, another key. But it wasn't just a collection of words on paper. It was a tool of manipulation she had used to control him. It was something that could have destroyed us, but now, perhaps, it would be the thing that brought the truth to light. I knew that now, despite everything, we could move forward.